Thanks very much, Tatiana. It's terrific to be here. So let me start by telling you a little bit about my son. This is him in the Great Barrier Reef. He's 13 now, and he's absolutely passionate about marine biology. And I've learned a lot from him because he's always been very curious about protecting the endangered species on the planet. And he's got a movement called Blue Promise, which he is very passionate about and we've all signed on to. But as part of our discussions about marine life, he made me think about animal taxonomies and how you classify animals. And that was very handy when 3 years ago I sat down with Jim Quigley, who is the CEO of Deloitte globally. And we were having one of those normal conversations, which is, so what is the thing that keeps you up at night? And Jim's response was, we have 170,000 people around the world, and I don't know how we're going to keep them all on exactly the same page. How do leaders get all their people to work as one? And he also thought that this is a subject that no matter which CEO or leader he talks to, everyone's thinking about that issue. How do you get lots of people on the same page? And so we started a project. Within Deloitte, we created a bit of a flagship project around it, and we started looking at all the different ways that people work as one. And the examples are plenty if you look around. And they're very different. If you look at the way, for example, developers work together to create apps for the App Store, it's very different than the way pharmacists work on systems at Medco so that they give the right advice in terms of prescriptions to 66 million people so that they're not hospitalized. And that's very different than the way Dabawalas deliver lunches to 200,000 people in Mumbai with fewer lunches being late than FedEx or UPS. As we looked at all these, we looked at the way people in the world were looking at collective action. And we said, what is the traditional way people look at it? And what we found was that there's really this dividing line. Most people and most of the literature treats this subject as though there's two types of collective behavior. Command and control, which is the one we're all familiar with. And then whatever else is other than that, primarily things that are collaborative, engaging, and adaptive. And you notice that I changed the size of the two halves of this slide because the nuance in all the literature is that command and control is either dead or passé. And if you're smart, you're going to be more collaborative and adaptive, and that's the way the world is going. A couple of problems with this. And the first thing is that command and control isn't dead. In fact, there are many good examples of collective behavior where were it not for some kind of top-down command and control leadership style, things wouldn't happen. And secondly, everything that you put in that other bucket is actually quite different. There's lots of different ways in which people can be collaborative and adaptive, so it's difficult to create that catch-all. And so what we wanted to do is understand this a little bit better, and we created a project to look at as many examples as we could, and we gathered around 80 examples of really effective collective leadership. And we said, as we look at these, I wonder if there's a way we could group them. Is there a natural way they can group? And we weren't comfortable about just using our own subjective way of thinking about the grouping. So we turned to some of the people who are really good forensic analysts, and we said, look, we've got these 80 or so cases, and for each of the cases, we've analyzed something like 86 variables. How hierarchical they are, how they recruit their people, how do they motivate them, is it financial or otherwise? How many gradations are there to kind of get ahead? Do they communicate in a top-down or networked way? Throw in every variable you could imagine. And there's a technique called a self-organizing map. And if you throw all these variables into a self-organizing map, it groups all the cases and tells you how many natural fitting groups there are. And we found 8. And so these aren't 8 groups that we brainstormed, these are 8 groups that the analytics at this point suggest we have for how collective leadership happens. And 3 of them tend to be more command and control. It's the green, black, and red on the left side. And the other 5 are variations of more collaborative. And what I wanted to do is, this is what we've written in the book, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we've learned about these archetypes and then some insights around what it means for leadership and how we try to get collective behavior to happen. And so the first thing is that 86 variables are too many for people to comprehend. So we simplified it into a 2-dimensional space. And the other thing we did is we named each of the archetypes. And what we tried to do with the naming is use something which is a leader-follower pair, because these archetypes are really explaining what people have understood about the way leaders and followers are working together in a setting. And so you can see that they go around a circle, and what we have imposed in them is 2 dimensions out of the 86 that seem to stand out. And the vertical dimension is all around the way direction is set and who exercises power. So the northern, if you want, because you go to the top of the circle, exercising of power is done top down. And so the leader is the person who sets, this is the direction, and everyone else follows. On the bottom of the circle, direction is something that emerges based on what the followers decide. And it's because the sovereignty rests with the followers. And so the leader's job is much more to see what you can do to get that direction to emerge. The horizontal dimension is much more around the degree to which people have freedom and autonomy in the tasks that they do day to day. And to the extent that they have a lot of autonomy, they're on the right side. They can determine how to do their jobs. And to the extent that their life is scripted, they're more to the left. And so that gives you a bit of a sense of the lay of the land. We're abstracting from 86 or so variables, but I'll describe to you the essence of each of the 8 archetypes. And let me start at the top of the circle with what we call landlord and tenants. Landlord and tenants is an archetype where the landlord, the leader, basically has some kind of power base which gives them the authority to set the rules. And the tenants, in a commercial way, decide whether or not they want to be part of that. And there's a market-based way for the best tenants to win. And if you think of the Apple App Store or the way Walmart distributes, you can think that there's a powerful base that then attracts, say, the developer community, which allows 1 billion apps to be downloaded. And that's a very powerful model. Completely opposite to that is what we call community organizer and volunteers. And this is a model where power rests in the volunteers. And a community organizer as a leader is not going to be able to tell them what to do because they see themselves as independent, sovereign decision makers. The best you can do as a leader is to run campaigns and have a narrative which encourages people to agree to do one thing. And then you try to convince them to do the next thing and so on. But it's a very different job being a community organizer and rallying a volunteer army than it is setting the rules of engagement as a landlord. Conduct an orchestra is a model which is all about precise execution of tasks. Think about an orchestra member must play the notes on the musical sheets in front of her. They can't just improvise. And the conductor decides how fast, with what degree of passion. And if you look at organizations like Medco, where pharmacists are not going to be able to remember 8,000 rules about dispensing drugs, you capture it in a system and they have to follow the rules or lives are lost. If you look at the opposite of that, it's what we call producer and creative team. This is where the task involves something which is around innovation, about creativity, and so the leader has to recruit a team with a diverse set of skills and engage them in that creative task. Dissent ends up being incredibly important here, frequent, intense interactions that lead to some kind of outcome. Those are the 4 core archetypes, and then there's some hybrids that jump out. General and soldiers is the traditional command and control, and it's got the top-down direction setting of landlord with the translation of it into the micro tasks and scripts that the orchestra has to do. And so it's, you decide this is the direction, and then you translate it into everything that different people have to do to get there. It thrives on hierarchy, and you see it in lots of organizations. Anywhere where advancement is stepped up, it's a good example of it. You'll see it in Starbucks, Marriott, a whole bunch of examples. One of my favorite models is one called architect and builders. Top-down direction or vision, if you want, by the architect, but in order for it to come to life, you need the creative involvement of a whole different set of different people, each of whom bring different skills. And if you want, the architect has to give freedom within a frame. And so the things that make this model work are the ability to get everyone to stay on the same blueprint and to rapidly iterate it. Tata in India knew that there was a market for a $2,000 car, but hundreds of suppliers had to reinvent every aspect of the car for this to work, from a different crankshaft to a different windscreen, and everyone had to be aware of the innovations that every other supplier made in case it affected them. So that's where this model works really, really well. Captain and sports team, no top-down direction. but a high degree of scripting. And if you think about any kind of sports team, the captain is on the field. So this is not a leader who's separate on the sidelines. This is a leader who's in the midst of the action. And people in a captain sports team environment know how each other behaves. If you think about Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Chris Bosh on the Miami Heat, the first 10 games, no one knew where the other one was. They took their turns with the ball. If you look at them now, they all know exactly what the other one's going to do, and they're playing in that mode. And when we look at the Dabawalas in Mumbai, who manage to deliver lunches, if one of them gets hurt or there's a monsoon or the bus is late, the other ones know what to do so that these lunches get delivered. And yet these are people who are primarily illiterate. And they manage to work with unbelievable Six Sigma efficiency. Last model is what we call senator and citizens, and it's essentially a model around participatory democracy. So you think about it as a workforce where there is no top-down strategy and there is no scripting. So people have to agree what it is they want to do together. What's important here is there's a constitution, there's a set of values and principles that define that community, and when people join that community, they're agreeing to abide by those rules. And what they then do, they have to manage their own direction. If you think about Roar as a company, this is an organization that elects its CEO. It's an organization where self-directed work teams have councils that manage their performance, make investment decisions. And there are lots of examples now in the internet space of communities that operate in this kind of participatory democracy kind of style. So I've taken you through these 8 models very, very quickly. We give them a lot more detail in the book. But what we were trying to do is to say, what's the purpose of this? Imagine if you could MRI an organization, and you could get inside everyone's brain, and you could, because of the data analytics, ask them a bunch of questions, and actually figure out what's the picture that's in everyone's head about how they think they should work with other people. You'd actually be able to map out the degree to which there's a common interpretation of work in that organization. And oftentimes what we find when we map it is that there can be lots of different patterns. In the one I'm displaying up there is an organization with 2 dominant archetypes. Now as a leader, if you can understand what is the way that people in your organization are thinking about working together, you can actually do some pretty cool things. Going back to Jim quickly, if you look at the top 300 people at Deloitte, this map gives you a sense of what they were like. About 45% in architect and builder, but there's this second population which is a little bit more community organizer, volunteer, centered and citizen, and creative team. And so the difference between the two is that the 45% are very happy to have a direction from the top and to be given freedom within a frame. The second population is going to want to have to opt in. They're going to want to understand the rationale behind the strategy, and they're going to want to have their fingerprints on it before they commit to actually get involved. And so as a leader, you have to have a process that accommodates that. We're now applying this to all kinds of environments, governments, schools. You can go into a high school and look at what's happening in terms of the way students and teachers see the school. We're applying it to professional franchises, but also all kinds of organizations. And we're finding it very interesting. I just very quickly want to share 3 insights with you from this work. The first thing is what we call the Ukrainian wedding effect, which is if you ever go to a Ukrainian wedding, you've never been there before, it doesn't take very long before you figure out how you can have fun and what you're expected to do at a Ukrainian wedding. Organizations that understand their archetype or understand how they work make it easy for new people to come in and fit in. Whereas people that have lots of different mixed messages make it difficult for people to understand how they're supposed to work with others. And so one of our key messages is it's good to have that core default sense of how work is done. The second big message is that it's not appropriate to think of collaboration as a goal in of itself. I mean, it's not an end. The end is something else. You use collaboration in order to accomplish that other thing. And so what we try to do is whenever we're talking about choosing an archetype, we think about what is it that you're trying to achieve. And it may be that for different purposes, you need different archetypes, which takes us to the third point. What you need to do in an organization, if you're going to be collectively using different modes, is have something like a fire alarm that lets people shift their modes. Imagine a creative environment like IDEO or Cirque du Soleil or Pixar. When the fire alarm goes off, immediately hundreds of people shift from producer creative team to conductor and orchestra, waiting for the instructions on how to exit the room. We need to develop the same types of cues and triggers so you can get hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to shift modes of behavior. The Egyptian people are now shifting from community organizer volunteer into a general and soldier mode. And that's happening immediately. How do you do that in your organization? We see the book that we've put out as just the beginning. We've introduced a new language, but it was based on 8 case studies. And what we're trying to do now is go back to the spirit of my son in terms of trying to identify new species and searching for that fish that he's never seen before underwater. And so we set up something called the Center for Collective Leadership. The website is called asone.org. Steve Langton is based in London and leads it. And what we're trying to do is collect as many cases as we can. There's an iPhone app, an iPad app. On the website, you can contribute any examples of collective leadership that you find. Our aim is to find 10,000 examples, and once we have about 1,000 really good ones, we'll try to rerun the numbers. We think that there are other archetypes that haven't been discovered yet, and there's certainly subspecies of archetypes, different modes of architect and builder. The more we understand about this, the more as a planet, we're going to be able to act as one to address the challenges we face.